Well, it's been very good and very exciting to hear a little bit of what has been said today. So we're at the end almost of today. Lots have been said.
Sometimes you have to pause and really take in what just happened, because we're so used to headline after headline in this space that the gravity of a single move can slip past. But let me tell you, the moment a Swiss bank, a bank in Switzerland of all places, openly adopts RLUSD, that's not just another little news bite in the crypto cycle. That's history being written in real time. And the reason it matters is simple. Switzerland is not just some random jurisdiction dabbling with digital assets. Switzerland is the beating heart of global banking credibility, of regulatory maturity, and of long-term trust in finance. When you say Swiss bank, people immediately think of stability, of wealth preservation, of safe custody of money that isn't going to evaporate overnight. So when that system says, yes, we're going to adopt RLUSD, we're not just talking about another stablecoin pilot. We're talking about the strongest signal yet that the Ripple ecosystem has broken into the very bloodstream of the traditional financial world. Let's back up for a second and break down why Switzerland is such a special stage for this play. For centuries, Swiss banks have been synonymous with neutrality and privacy. That reputation didn't come out of nowhere. It came from their role in wars, in global conflicts, in times when other banking systems collapsed and people still trusted Switzerland to guard assets and keep money flowing. That culture of Switzerland as the safe vault of the world carried over into the modern digital era. And that's why institutions, corporates, and sovereign wealth funds have always placed massive confidence in Swiss financial infrastructure. So for them to make a leap into RLUSD, they're not just experimenting with another shiny crypto toy. They're vetting, they're evaluating, and they're signaling to the world that Ripple's stablecoin model is sound enough, robust enough, and aligned enough with compliance frameworks to operate inside the Swiss fortress of banking. Now, RLUSD itself might seem like just another stablecoin in an ocean of stablecoins. You've got USDT, you've got USDC, you've got PYUSD, you've got a laundry list of them. But RLUSD is different, and I don't say that lightly, because this isn't about yet another dollar token floating around in the DeFi space. RLUSD is Ripple's formal step into the stablecoin wars, and it's not built for the average retail degan to gamble on meme coins. It's designed for enterprise-grade settlement, for real-world finance, for cross-border money movement that doesn't just sit on crypto exchanges but plugs directly into global banking systems. The fact that a Swiss bank would touch it at all proves the design worked. They didn't adopt Tether, they didn't adopt a random algo coin, they adopted RLUSD, because they saw the compliance-first design and the liquidity potential Ripple brings. And let me hammer this point. A Swiss bank doesn't move fast. They don't just roll out a new instrument on a whim. There are internal committees, there are regulators looking over their shoulders, there are reputational risks on the line. These guys guard their brand equity like gold. They know that a single misstep with the wrong token could stain their legacy for decades. And yet, they still went ahead. Why? Because Ripple has been positioning for years as the bridge between old money and new rails. RLUSD is the safe bridge stablecoin that banks can hold, transact with, and actually build settlement workflows on top of. When a Swiss bank endorses it by integrating it, they're saying Ripple's compliance-first, institution-ready strategy paid off. Now, you might be asking, okay, but what does that have to do with XRP's price? Isn't RLUSD separate? And this is where the real story starts to unfold. Because while RLUSD itself is a stablecoin pegged to the dollar, what underpins its utility, what makes it liquid, what allows it to flow across borders at scale, is the very infrastructure Ripple built with XRP as the native bridge. You see, stablecoins are great, but they're not magic. Moving them across chains, across borders, across fiat rails still requires liquidity, still requires swaps, still requires a base layer that can handle settlement finality at speed and low cost. That's where XRP comes in. XRP is the grease, the underlying liquidity layer that makes RLUSD practical in a global sense. And when Swiss banks start testing RLUSD in real corridors, say USD to CHF or CHF to Euro, they're inevitably going to be tapping into XRP liquidity pools behind the scenes. That's not theory. That's mechanics. And remember, Switzerland is a hub for private banking clients, for corporates, for sovereign wealth, for family offices that move billions with a phone call. This isn't retail adoption. This is the top of the food chain in finance starting to normalize digital stablecoins through Ripple's architecture. And if they're normalizing RLUSD, they're normalizing XRP by default, because XRP is what ensures that these stablecoin rails don't freeze up under stress. That's why I say this is more than just a headline. This is a leverage point. This is the wedge that cracks open the door to XRP being embedded into the bloodstream of the largest, safest, most trusted banking systems in the world. Let's put it in even simpler terms. Imagine Switzerland as the cautious friend in the group. You know, the one who always waits for everyone else to try something risky before they even dip their toe in. When that cautious friend finally jumps in, the rest of the group knows it must be safe. That's what just happened here. If Swiss banks are greenlighting RLUSD, every other bank on the fence is watching closely. They're saying, wait, if Switzerland's regulators are okay with this, maybe we need to take another look. And that ripple effect, no pun intended, is what changes the game for global adoption. Now let's talk about timing. Why 2025? Why now? Well, look at the macro landscape. We're in a moment when dollar dominance is being questioned globally, when central banks are exploring digital currencies, when settlement systems like SWIFT are facing real competition for the first time in decades. Against that backdrop, a neutral player like Switzerland saying yes to RLUSD is massive. They're not a US bank being pressured by the SEC. They're not a Chinese bank tied to a CBDC strategy. They're neutral, they're respected, and they're pragmatic. And in 2025, with institutions hungry for compliant digital rails but wary of crypto chaos, Ripple just handed them the perfect tool. That timing is not accidental. Ripple has been building towards this exact inflection point for years. And let's not overlook the branding. RLUSD isn't some random acronym with no weight. It carries Ripple's name, Ripple's reputation, Ripple's years of battling regulators and surviving lawsuits. When a Swiss bank puts RLUSD on its balance sheet, it's indirectly validating Ripple's entire strategy and, by extension, XRP's role in that strategy. You cannot separate the two. RLUSD makes Ripple sticky inside traditional finance. XRP makes Ripple liquid inside digital finance. Together, they form a complete bridge. That's why this adoption makes XRP more valuable, not less. It's not a competitor to XRP. It's a multiplier. Here's the thing about stablecoins. They're only as useful as the rails they run on. Anybody can issue a dollar token, we've seen it a dozen times over. But most of them end up in this weird purgatory where they're just floating around on exchanges, mostly used for speculation, with very little penetration into the actual banking world. And why is that? Because stablecoins by themselves don't solve the infrastructure problem. They don't magically plug into correspondent banking networks, they don't replace SWIFT messages, and they don't create liquidity where none exists. That's the missing piece that Ripple has been engineering toward, and RLUSD is basically the Trojan horse that finally gets a compliant, bank-ready stablecoin into the very institutions that have resisted this entire digital asset revolution. So when a Swiss bank signs on, it's not about them suddenly becoming crypto-friendly in the way you and I think about it. They're not trying to buy Shiba or chase meme coins. What they're doing is strategically looking at settlement efficiency. If I'm a Swiss bank moving client money around the world, I've got bottlenecks. I've got dollar flows stuck in New York. I've got euro flows crawling through Target 2. I've got cross-border frictions with Asian currencies. That stuff costs money, time, and creates risk. If RLUSD can shortcut some of those pain points, especially if it can settle instantly on-chain and still remain compliant with Basel III requirements and local regulators, that's a game changer. And again, the critical link here is that RLUSD doesn't exist in a vacuum. It's tethered into RippleNet, into ODL, into XRP liquidity pools. That's where XRP starts to see real utility. Now think about the ETF conversations swirling around crypto in 2025. Everyone is focused on Bitcoin ETFs, Ethereum ETFs, maybe even Solana ETFs, right? But nobody is paying enough attention to the boring plumbing side of finance. Stablecoin rails are where the big money is actually flowing. BlackRock doesn't care about gambling on meme coins. They care about how trillions of dollars can move around the world more efficiently. Swiss banks adopting RLUSD is essentially a signal to Wall Street that, hey, here's a stable, compliant token that institutions can actually trust. And when Wall Street sees Switzerland endorse something, they know the regulatory homework has been done. That creates the domino effect that leads to broader adoption, and eventually to demand for more XRP liquidity to grease the system. Here's where it gets even more interesting. Liquidity begets liquidity. The moment one Swiss bank starts transacting RLUSD, the counterparties they deal with, whether that's in London, New York, Dubai, or Singapore, now have to think about how they settle those flows. If they don't adopt RLUSD, they risk being the slow leg in the transaction. So what happens? They start exploring Ripple RLUSD. That's network effect 101. And every time that happens, XRP gets pulled deeper into the equation, because XRP is the bridge that balances these multi-currency corridors when the stablecoin itself isn't enough. Let me give you an example. Say a Swiss bank is moving client funds from CHF to USD using RLUSD as the settlement token. That's clean, simple. But now imagine the same bank has to move money to Brazil to settle in BRL. There is no RLBRL stablecoin today. So what happens? They use RLUSD as the base and bridge through XRP into BRL liquidity pools. That's where XRP's role becomes unavoidable. Stablecoins cover the simple pairs, but for the long tail of exotic currencies, XRP is the universal translator. And the more RLUSD flows there are, the more bridging demand for XRP grows. That's not theory. That's math. And let's not forget the regulatory optics. Switzerland adopting RLUSD sends a message to US regulators too. Ripple fought the SEC tooth and nail for years, and while the US dragged its feet, the rest of the world is quietly moving ahead. By 2025, the US can no longer ignore the fact that global banks are already using Ripple's stablecoin. That's leverage in regulatory negotiations. And if US banks want to stay competitive, they'll push their own regulators for clarity, which opens the door for domestic adoption of both RLUSD and XRP. It's always been a domino game, and Switzerland just toppled one of the biggest pieces. Now, if you zoom out, you start to see the bigger picture. RLUSD is not competition for XRP. That's a surface-level misunderstanding people have. Instead, it's a catalyst. It gives banks a comfortable entry point, a dollar-backed, boring, stable token that looks and feels safe. Once they're in, though, the mechanics of global liquidity force them into the XRP ecosystem. That's the brilliance of Ripple's design. They didn't push banks to leap straight into volatile assets. They built a safe on-ramp with RLUSD, knowing that XRP would naturally become indispensable once the flows started scaling. And honestly, this is why Swiss adoption is such a mic-drop moment. If the most cautious, most compliance-obsessed financial hub in the world is now running RLUSD, what excuse do other banks have? None. And when the excuses dry up, adoption accelerates. And when adoption accelerates, XRP demand rises. That's why this isn't just a headline to shrug at. It's the quiet beginning of a massive liquidity flywheel. Look, people get excited when they see a chart go up. That's normal. Human psychology is built for dopamine hits. But the real excitement, the kind that makes insiders lean forward in their chairs, is when you see a system that used to take 3 days suddenly collapse into 3 seconds. That's what's happening with this RLUSD rollout. The Swiss bank didn't just say, "Yeah, we'll experiment with it." They put their credibility on the line. And let me tell you something. Swiss banks don't gamble on hype. Their entire reputation, going back centuries, is built on being conservative, quiet, and deliberate. If they're adopting RLUSD, that means they've stress-tested the hell out of it. They've run simulations. They've checked liquidity reserves. They've modeled compliance exposure. They've probably even called regulators behind closed doors in Washington, Brussels, and London to say, "Are we okay to do this?" And the fact they moved forward tells me the rails are ready. Now let's connect that to XRP. RLUSD is denominated in dollars. That's key because the dollar is still king, no matter what gold bugs or de-dollarization pundits say. If you're moving global value, chances are it's touching USD somewhere along the way. But here's the rub. If you're a Swiss bank using RLUSD, and you need to convert it into yen, peso, naira, or rupee, what's the bridge asset? You can't always rely on deep liquidity in those corridors with dollars alone. That's where XRP comes in. XRP provides the instant settlement between RLUSD and those exotic currencies. You're not going to build massive liquidity pools for every single currency pair on Earth. That's inefficient. But with XRP as the middle, suddenly every currency has a universal translator. RLUSD moves in, XRP does the heavy lifting, local fiat comes out. Done in seconds. This is why the value of XRP isn't tied to retail hype cycles anymore. It's tied to volume. It's tied to how many banks, payment providers, and institutions are running transactions through these rails. And with a Swiss bank on board, you've just sent a signal to every compliance department in Europe. We did the homework, and this passes muster. That domino doesn't fall in isolation. The Germans will look. The French will look. Even the cautious UK banks who've been burned by crypto scandals will have to take another look. And once you have multiple European players lining up, Wall Street doesn't want to be late to the party. And here's where the ETF angle comes back in. ETFs thrive on liquidity. They need deep, reliable pools to handle inflows and outflows without blowing up spreads. What do you think happens when XRP liquidity is being constantly deepened by real-world usage of RLUSD? Suddenly, the case for an XRP ETF isn't just speculative, it's practical. It becomes a necessity. If banks are routing billions through XRP every week, institutional investors are going to demand a clean, regulated way to get exposure. That's what an ETF does. It packages the utility into an investable product. And Wall Street knows how to sell ETFs better than anything else. So let's fast forward a bit. Right now, the Swiss bank is the first domino. But in 6 months, maybe 2 or 3 more European banks join. By 2026, you've got adoption creeping into Asia, because Singapore and Hong Kong are already salivating at the idea of tokenized liquidity. By 2027, the IMF itself might be settling SDR baskets using tokenized dollars, euros, and yen with XRP as the neutral bridge. That's not science fiction. That's where the rails are pointing. And here's the kicker. The retail crowd still won't get it. They'll be chasing the next memecoin, waiting for 100x pumps. Meanwhile, the quiet plumbing of the financial system will have shifted beneath their feet. And when they finally wake up, they'll realize that the assets that mattered weren't the ones screaming moon on Twitter, but the ones quietly moving trillions in value across borders. XRP plugged into RLUSD is one of those assets. That's why I keep hammering this. Price charts tell you the surface story, but adoption tells you the real story. And right now, the real story is that the Swiss bank just gave XRP the green light in a way no influencer, no hype cycle, no partnership announcement ever could. This is regulatory-grade validation, and it makes XRP more valuable not because people believe in it, but because the system literally can't run without it. Here's what I want people to really understand. The Swiss bank adopting RLUSD isn't just a headline you scroll past on X. It's the first crack in a dam that's been holding back trillions of dollars in potential. It's not about a single transaction or even a single bank. It's about setting a precedent. Once one bank proves this model works, instant, compliant, global settlement with a stablecoin tethered into Ripple's rails, the rest of the industry can no longer say, it's too risky. The excuse is gone. And when excuses disappear, adoption accelerates. Now look at XRP through that lens. For years, critics mocked it. It's a banker's coin. It's too centralized. It's dead money. And yet, quietly in the background, Ripple kept building, kept fighting regulatory battles, kept putting the legal clarity pieces in place. And here we are in 2025, and what's happening? The so-called banker's coin is the one actually being used by surprise banks. Not DeFi Degans, not pump groups, actual regulated financial institutions. And that means its value is no longer speculative. It's infrastructural. But don't get it twisted, this isn't some overnight flip. This is the slow grind of legitimacy. It's the same story we saw with Bitcoin ETFs. People laughed at the idea for years. They said the SEC would never approve it. Then BlackRock came in and suddenly the narrative changed. What we're witnessing with RLUSD is the same kind of narrative shift, but it's happening at the level of money plumbing. And the implications are massive. Because once banks normalize stablecoin settlements, once they see the speed, the cost savings, the liquidity efficiency, they won't go back. No one's going to wait 3 days for a swift transfer once they've tasted 3-second settlement. It's like asking people to give up smartphones and return to fax machines. It's not going to happen. And XRP sits at the center of that transition, not as the shiny object everyone speculates on, but as the utility asset the system needs to function. So the real question isn't will XRP go up? That's the wrong frame. The real question is, how much global value will ultimately pass through XRP rails? Because the answer to that determines its long-term value, not a meme cycle, not a hype wave. And when you frame it that way, the adoption by a Swiss bank isn't just bullish news. It's a signal that the snowball has already started rolling down the hill. The momentum is there. This is the part where I circle back to something simple. We have to cut out the noise, the drama, the distractions. Stop obsessing over daily charts. Stop letting toxic narratives drag the community into infighting. Focus on the fundamentals. Focus on the fact that the rails are being laid, the banks are coming on board, and the infrastructure is locking into place. That's the story. That's the signal. Everything else is noise. And if you've been here long enough, you know the truth. The winners in this game are the ones who saw utility before everyone else. That's where XRP is heading. That's what RLUSD just proved. If you've made it this far into the video, then you already know how huge this moment is. The Swiss bank moving into RLUSD isn't just a headline. It's a signal that XRP's time is coming faster than most people realize. And if you want to stay ahead of that curve, this is where you lock in. On this channel, we don't do hype for hype's sake. We break down the real moves, the fundamentals, the adoption stories that actually matter. Every day the narrative around crypto shifts, and if you're not plugged in, you're going to miss the signs that separate winners from bag holders. So here's what I want you to do. Hit that subscribe button right now. Smash the like button so this message reaches more people who need to hear it. And turn on notifications because when the next big announcement drops, you'll want to be the first to know what it means for XRP, for crypto, and for your portfolio. The next wave is coming. Don't get left behind. Subscribe, stay locked in, and let's ride this out together.